Right now, while you are reading this, your body is making a decision about your muscles. Not tomorrow, not after your next meal. Right now, in this exact moment, your body is calculating whether the protein available in your bloodstream is sufficient to maintain the muscle tissue you currently have. And if the answer is no, if the amino acid pool circulating in your blood falls below the threshold your body needs to sustain its lean tissue, something happens that most people never feel, never notice, and never connect to the symptoms they experience years later. Your body begins consuming itself. Not dramatically, not painfully, silently, precisely, at the cellular level. Your muscle fibers begin breaking down their own structural proteins to supply the amino acids your blood cannot provide. This process has a clinical name, muscle protein catabolism, and it is happening right now in the bodies of the majority of people who eat a typical modern diet. Not because they are starving, not because they are sick, but simply because they have never been told how much protein their body actually requires to prevent this from happening every single day. The consequences of this quiet, daily deficit accumulate over years and decades in ways that most people only discover when it is far harder to reverse than it would have been to prevent. What you are about to read will change how you think about protein, about aging, about energy, and about the body you are living in right now. Let's go through exactly what happens. To understand what insufficient protein does to your muscles, you first need to understand what your muscles are doing even when you are not using them. Skeletal muscle is not passive tissue sitting on your bones waiting to be activated during exercise. It is the most metabolically active tissue in your body by mass. Even at complete rest, lying still, doing nothing, your muscles are engaged in a continuous and energetically expensive process called protein turnover. Every day, approximately 1 to 2% of your total muscle protein is broken down and must be rebuilt from scratch. Old, damaged, misfolded, or oxidized protein structures within muscle fibers are identified, dismantled by proteasomal and autophagic machinery, and their amino acid components are released back into circulation. Simultaneously, new muscle protein is being synthesized from dietary amino acids to replace what was dismantled. This continuous cycle of breakdown and synthesis is not a flaw in your biology. It is the quality control system that maintains the structural integrity, contractile efficiency, and metabolic health of your muscle tissue. Proteins that are not regularly replaced accumulate damage, generate oxidative stress, and impair muscle cell function. The turnover process keeps your muscles young at the molecular level. But this process has an absolute requirement that cannot be bypassed or negotiated. It requires a continuous, adequate supply of amino acids from dietary protein. Without them, synthesis cannot keep pace with breakdown. And the gap between synthesis and breakdown, when breakdown exceeds synthesis day after day, is the gap in which you gradually lose the muscle you have. The first mechanism by which insufficient protein damages your muscles operates through a molecular signaling pathway called mTORC1, mechanistic target of rapamycin complex 1. mTORC1 is the primary anabolic switch in your muscle cells. When sufficient amino acids, particularly leucine, the branching chain amino acid that acts as the primary trigger, are present in your bloodstream, mTORC1 activates and drives muscle protein synthesis. When leucine and other essential amino acids fall below threshold levels, mTORC1 activity drops. Muscle protein synthesis slows, but protein breakdown does not slow proportionally. Your body's need for amino acids continues regardless of dietary supply. Your liver needs them to synthesize albumin, clotting factors, and transport proteins. Your immune system needs them to produce antibodies and immune cells. Your gut lining needs them to maintain its epithelial barrier. Your brain needs them to produce neurotransmitters. These are survival priorities that your body will not sacrifice. When dietary protein is insufficient to meet all of these demands simultaneously, Your body implements a triage system. It redirects amino acids from muscle protein synthesis toward these survival priorities, and it supplements the supply by accelerating muscle protein breakdown to harvest the amino acids already stored in your muscle fibers. Your muscles are the largest amino acid reservoir in your body. When dietary supply falls short, they become the supply. This is not a dramatic emergency response. It is a quiet, continuous, low-grade reallocation that happens every day that your protein intake is insufficient. And most people have no idea it is happening because it produces no immediate symptoms that they can feel. The second mechanism involves the progressive loss of type 2 muscle fibers, the fast-twitch, high-force generating fibers that are responsible not just for athletic performance, but for the functional strength that determines your quality of life as you age. Type 2 fibers are more metabolically demanding than type 1 slow-twitch fibers. They require more amino acids to maintain their structure. They respond more dramatically to both training stimulus and protein availability, and they are the first fibers to atrophy when protein intake is chronically insufficient. When you lose type 2 fibers, you do not just lose strength. You lose the primary tissue that burns glucose at high rates during intense activity, which means you lose a significant portion of your capacity to clear blood sugar after meals. You lose the contractile capacity that allows you to generate the force needed to prevent falls, to carry groceries, to rise from a chair without using your arms. The functional benchmarks that, when they begin declining, signal the beginning of the physical deterioration most people associate with aging. What most people do not understand is that this deterioration does not begin at 60 or 70. It begins at 30, progressing slowly but continuously in anyone who is not consuming enough protein to maintain type 2 fiber mass. By the time people notice significant functional decline, the difficulty climbing stairs, the weakness when carrying bags, the inability to recover from minor physical effort, they have typically been losing type 2 fiber mass for 15 to 20 years. The muscle loss is the end of a very long process. The protein deficit is the beginning of it. The third mechanism operates through your resting metabolic rate and produces the weight gain that millions of people in their 30s and 40s cannot explain. Skeletal muscle is metabolically expensive tissue. Each pound of muscle burns approximately 6 to 10 calories per day at complete rest, simply to maintain itself, running protein turnover, maintaining membrane potential, sustaining the biochemical activity that keeps the fiber alive and functional. When you chronically underconsume protein and muscle protein catabolism exceeds synthesis day after day, you lose muscle mass. As muscle mass declines, your resting metabolic rate declines with it. A person who loses 10 pounds of muscle over 10 years of insufficient protein intake has reduced their resting metabolic rate by 60 to 100 calories per day. Over a year, this is a deficit of 22,000 to 36,000 calories, the caloric equivalent of 6 to 10 pounds of fat. They eat the same amount they always have. Their body burns significantly less. The gap accumulates as body fat, and the more body fat they carry, the more insulin resistant they become, the more cortisol they produce, and the worse the conditions become for the muscle protein synthesis they are already not doing enough of. Insufficient protein intake does not just cause muscle loss. Through the metabolic rate decline that follows muscle loss, it causes fat gain. Most people experiencing unexplained weight gain in their 30s are not eating more than they used to. They have less muscle than they used to, burning fewer calories at rest, and they have no idea that the primary driver of that muscle loss was a protein intake they thought was adequate, because nobody had ever told them what adequate actually means. The fourth mechanism is the one that connects insufficient protein to fatigue, immune dysfunction, cognitive decline, and a dozen other symptoms that people never connect to what they are eating. When your body is in a state of chronic low-grade muscle catabolism, breaking down muscle protein to supply amino acids for priority functions, the ongoing availability of amino acids for non-priority functions becomes compromised. Neurotransmitter synthesis requires amino acids. Serotonin requires tryptophan. Dopamine and norepinephrine require phenylalanine and tyrosine. GABA requires glutamate. When these precursors are in short supply because dietary protein is insufficient and the body is prioritizing structural and immune demands, neurotransmitter production becomes suboptimal. The result is not dramatic. It is the kind of subtle, persistent, low-grade cognitive and emotional flatness that most people attribute to stress, aging, or simply having a difficult life. Motivation that feels slightly lower than it should. Concentration that requires more effort than it used to. Mood that is fine, but not quite as resilient as it was. These are not psychological problems. They are amino acid problems. Similarly, your immune system's ability to produce the antibodies, cytokines, and immune cells that defend against infection, cancer surveillance, and autoimmune regulation depends on adequate amino acid availability. People with chronically insufficient protein intake have measurably impaired immune responses, higher rates of infection, slower wound healing, reduced vaccine efficacy, and compromised capacity to clear early-stage abnormal cells before they develop into clinical pathology. The connection between the protein on your plate and the immune system defending your body from cancer is direct, biochemical, and profoundly underappreciated. Here is the number that matters, and the one almost nobody knows. The recommended dietary allowance for protein, the number printed in nutrition guidelines and used to assess whether a diet is adequate, is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. This number is widely cited and almost universally misunderstood. It is not the optimal intake for maintaining muscle mass. It is the minimum required to prevent deficiency disease in sedentary young adults. For anyone over 30, anyone who exercises, anyone under significant physiological stress, and anyone concerned with maintaining muscle mass and metabolic health over decades, the research is clear that this number is dramatically insufficient. Studies on muscle protein synthesis rates consistently show that adults over 30 require between 1.6 and 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day to maintain positive protein balance, to ensure that synthesis exceeds breakdown and muscle mass is preserved rather than eroded. For a 70-kilogram person, the difference between the RDA and the evidence-based optimal intake is the difference between 56 grams of protein per day and 112 to 154 grams. Most people eating a typical modern diet consume somewhere in the middle, more than the deficiency threshold, less than the maintenance threshold, and spend years in the chronic low-grade catabolic state described above, without ever understanding why their body feels the way it does, or why the aging process seems to be happening faster than it should. Your muscles are not waiting for the gym. They are not waiting for a specific diet or a specific supplement. They are waiting for one thing: the amino acids they need to maintain themselves every single day. Give them what they need, and the protein turnover cycle runs correctly. Muscle mass is preserved. Metabolic rate stays elevated. Neurotransmitters are synthesized adequately. Immune function is maintained, and the body composition and energy you want become vastly more achievable. Fail to give them what they need, and the process described above runs quietly in the background, day after day, year after year, producing consequences that accumulate silently until they are no longer silent. Your muscle mass is not something that declines inevitably with age. It declines inevitably with insufficient protein. That is a completely different statement with completely different implications. One implies resignation. The other implies a decision you can make at your next meal. If this changed how you think about what you eat every day and what it is doing to the body you will be living in for the next 40 years, every video here goes inside the exact mechanisms so you understand not just what to do, but exactly what happens when you do not. Like this video and share it with someone who thinks they eat enough protein. They almost certainly do not.